Hey guys, and welcome to the first episode of Sleepin with Pete. And if you're not sure why I'm talking like this, or what this video is about, Sleepin with Pete, what the heck do I mean by that? I will have an annotation right here with a video explaining what this series is about, as well as in the video description below. For those of you that don't plan on clicking on the link but are still going to watch this, essentially this is a video series that I'm doing where I talk in a very relaxed, quiet, hushed tone, with the intent of helping people get to sleep. It's experimental. I'm trying this out, so if you guys like it, be sure to leave me a thumbs up. That lets me know that I should make more of these in the future. So in the first episode, I figured a great topic of discussion would be kind of fitting for this. Games that I personally dreamed of coming true that actually came true. You know, not realistically actually having a dream about them, but in the sense that, this game came out and I just never imagined in a million years that it would actually come out or come to be true, or like maybe it's some kind of dream collaboration or an HD remake of some sort that I never thought would have been released. So I picked out a big stack of games here that I'm going to talk about. This is going to be a longer style video, so the intent is you can leave this playing in the background. Just let it play while you're playing another game, doing something else around the house, or trying to get to sleep. So, what do you say we get started with the first game? And that is Ninokuni, Wrath of the White Witch. Now, the reason why I would call this a dream game is because I've always been a fan of Studio Ghibli for many, many years. And who would have ever thought that, let alone Studio Ghibli, would collaborate with Level 5, one of my personal favorite developers, mostly because of the Dark Cloud games, specifically Dark Cloud 1. So when this game was announced, it was like, I got smacked in the face. I could have never imagined this ever happening, and the fact that it actually turned out to be a really good game was like a dream game, for me personally. Lots of animation from the studio. And luckily the gameplay was actually also really good. The problem I had with this is once you get about 20 hours into the game, it started to get very repetitive, at least for me, because I was very used to, I shouldn't say very used to, but I was going for 100% run. And I was doing everything in the game, every side quest, collecting every monster, and it got to be a bit repetitive. So I actually never saw this through all the way to the end, but I can tell you this is the kind of game that I will go back to. I'll probably end up restarting it from the start and not worrying so much about getting everything and kind of just going through it at a leisurely pace without using a guide or anything like that, because I was using the strategy guide to kind of help me get everything through the game. But soundtrack-wise, graphically, this was like, this really was like a dream come true. And I'm probably going to stop trying to say that word dream, because this is, if you can't tell, this is going to be a long video. And the hope is that, creating a longer video like this will give you guys enough time to get to sleep. Because if you're like me, and you have trouble getting to sleep, hopefully a video like this will help you guys out. And also, it's snowing out right now. And I don't know if my mic is picking that up, but I'm close to a window, and the snow is really pounding the window hard. It must be like hail or something, so I don't know if you can hear that or not. So, that's the first game. This next one is really odd. When I was going through picking out games for this video, I was like, when I initially thought of this idea, I never thought of this game, and then I saw it, and I was like, you know what, this actually kind of fits. A few years ago, when I was at PAX Prime, and I was in an arcade. I think it was, was it the GameWorks? I forget what arcade it was. Maybe it was the GameWorks arcade. I don't exactly remember. But I was playing with good friend Jason Heine, TheEMUreview, and we stumbled upon a game called Tank Tank Tank. Very simple arcade game with like miniature tanks, and it was very simplistic, very arcadey, perfect for the arcade. You sit in this big hulking seat, and this thing is like vibrating like nonstop. I mean, that seat was like, man, forget paying, to sit in the massage chair or something in the mall. You just go play Tank 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 and you'll get your massage fill, I'll tell you that much. It was very simple. It supported up to 4 players, I think. Or maybe it was, I don't remember. But anyway, the 2 of us were playing, and it was so much fun. And I remember saying to myself, man, this would make an amazing release on like Xbox Live Arcade or, PS3 or Nintendo. Just bring this game out outside of the arcades. and slap on some online play, because this is the kind of game that you want to play with other people, and it would be really great. So when this game was announced for the Wii U, I was ecstatic. I was like, wow, who would have ever thought that my dreams would come true? But then myself, as well as Jason, I'm sure many others, were very saddened to learn that there was no multiplayer online. There was local multiplayer, which I did have the, pleasure of playing with some friends when I had them over to try out the Wii U sometime. And we actually had a lot of fun, because it is a fun multiplayer game, despite being very simple and arcadey. It's just like a deathmatch style with, different weapons. I mean, you can tell this game is pulled straight from an arcade. This game was never meant to leave the arcades and be ported to a home console. You can just tell. But the fact that it lacked online, it was very disappointing. I actually made a petition on the Wii U. I don't even remember where you go on and every game had like the community forum built into the Wii U. I went on there and I made a petition. I'm like, this game needs online. And there were people like thumbing it up. They were like, hell yeah, this game needs online. We need to play this online. Never went anywhere, of course. I didn't think it would, but it got quite a high response. It might even still be on there. I don't even know. The Miiverse, sorry. It's been so long since I've used it. But, yeah, I mean, I think it launched too as like a $50 or $60 game, and that price was way too much. I had launchitis with Tank. I'll tell you that much. Like, I should not have paid the amount I paid for this game, and within like a month, it was down to like $20, and I saw that coming a mile away. But, yeah, just a game I never thought would come out, but did. Okay, so next is Sonic Chronicles: The Dark Brotherhood for Nintendo 3DS. And you guys know me, I'm a big Sonic fan, and I'll tell you, this is not the only Sonic game that I'm going to be talking about in this video. But who would have ever thought that a Sonic the Hedgehog RPG would actually come true? Alright, maybe some did and predicted it, because Sonic was running through the ropes like Mario, where, he was getting racing games and, Mario Party clones with Sonic Shuffle over the years, and just all these different wacky ideas with Sonic. So maybe it was not the biggest surprise, but to me it was. But then to see that BioWare, of all RPG developers, was developing the game, I mean, that was like, whew, couldn't ask for more. The game actually ended up being pretty good, but I say that in the sense that it was pretty good as a fan of Sonic. If you're not a fan of Sonic, Sonic Chronicles and the Dark Brotherhood will definitely not be for you. It is fan service to the max. I mean, if you're not familiar with the universe or the characters, you're going to want to avoid Sonic Chronicles the Dark Brotherhood at all means, all costs. The problem I had with it was some of the characters, it was a turn-based RPG, by the way, for those of you that didn't know. The overworld was a little sketchy the way you moved around, because it was more about the battles. The battles were a lot of fun. Four-player party, turn-based, but towards the end of the game it got a little too easy, because I used one of the party members. You can use as Cream the rabbit, but Cream is completely broken as a healer, because she had this one ability that like healed all of your party members almost to like full every turn. I mean, it made the game very trivial. So a recommendation that I have for those of you that have Sonic Chronicles The Dark Brotherhood or plan on buying it and playing it in the future, if you want a challenge, choose Tails as your healer. He's a single target healer. It'll make the game more fun, more challenging. If you're looking to just play through the game and see how it is, use Cream the Rabbit as your healer. But it was actually, it actually had a decently in-depth storyline. They really tried. Overall, with my biases as a Sonic the Hedgehog fan, I would give the game like a solid 8 out of 10. I mean, I really did enjoy it. It wasn't as good as I had hoped and imagined it to be. Trying to vary my word usage here. But, yeah, it was a game that I never saw coming, but did. Okay, the next game I'm choosing here is Klonoa Door to Phantomile. Not specifically the PlayStation 1 version, but more so the fact that there was an HD remake on the Wii for Klonoa. Now, the reason why this was such a big surprise, and like I never imagined they would actually do this, is because Klonoa had been a series that Namco had seemed to, or Namco Bandai I should say, they seemed to have abandoned it, because the last release was actually on every release of a Klonoa game to me was like a huge surprise, because I always thought, man, that must be the end for Klonoa, because it didn't really have a huge fan base. And then the last release was on the Game Boy Advance, Klonoa 2 Dream Champ Tournament, I believe was the name. And that was years and years and years had passed, and I was like, man, I guess Klonoa's done for. And then lo and behold, out of nowhere, they announce a Klonoa remake of the first game on the Wii. Now, I do want to go on the record and say that I actually still prefer the first Klonoa game because I think the graphics have more charm. It has that sort of like 2D sprite on top of 3D background graphical style. And the 3D remake on the Wii does away with that for a full 3D rendering, which is nice for Klonoa fans to play through once, but I prefer the original version. The reason why I know Klonoa is pretty much dead now, there have been no new games. The Project X Zone on the 3DS basically confirmed it for me because, well, Klonoa was basically the only series that didn't make a return from the previous game on the PS2. The name is like eluding me right now, I don't know why. But anyway, they didn't include Klonoa, and that was really disappointing, and hopefully one day we'll see another Klonoa game, but it's not looking good. It's really not. And there was also a Klonoa online comic that was put out that was also shut down. So yeah, things for Klonoa are really not looking up, and it's kind of sad. It's one of my favorite series of all time. So, sad to see it go like that, but you never know. Maybe we'll see a return. Alright, the next game is Ico and Shadow of the Colossus HD Collection. So, there have been a lot of really amazing HD collections that have come out. Jak and Daxter, Sly Cooper. There's been quite a lot of HD remakes coming out. But the reason why the Ico and Shadow of the Colossus one is so impactful is because it was really one of the first HD collections that really came out on the PS3. So it was sort of a big deal because once we started seeing like the God of War games coming out and then the Devilman, like it started to become a fad and a trend. But the fact that this was one of the first was even more surprising because it's like, wow, they're actually taking my favorite game of all time, as well as one of my other favorite games of all time, not my number one, but Ico being my favorite game ever. They're actually remaking it in HD. I mean, that was like, that is something that I literally did think about for a very long time, and I never thought would come true, but I have to credit Shadow of the Colossus. It's thanks to Shadow of the Colossus that this was possible. Ico never really got popular until they released a Shadow of the Colossus, and then when Shadow of the Colossus came out and became a greatest hits, people discovered Ico. So it was thanks to Shadow of the Colossus that made the HD collection possible. Now, I was so excited for the HD remake that I couldn't wait to get my hands on it that I imported the Japanese collector's edition. I decided not to open it in the long run. I decided to keep it all sealed up for collector's purposes. That just shows you how excited I was for that HD collection. This next one is kind of like out of the box. I was just going through my games and I'm like, wow, I do remember being really excited and never thinking I'd be able to play a game like this, but Godzilla Destroy All Monsters Melee. The one I played was on the GameCube, but I just decided to pick up the Xbox version because, well, I don't know, this one has additional content, but basically, this was really the first true Godzilla game that I had ever played. There were other Godzilla releases in the US on other systems, like Super Nintendo, Game Boy as well, Game Boy Color, I think. But this is like the first, I think I could be wrong here, but at least in the US, the first like real throwback to Godzilla monsters, but in a 3D game, like an actual like current generation Godzilla game. So this was like a big deal because I'd always been a fan of Godzilla games growing up, or not Godzilla movies as a kid growing up. So this was like, this was pretty cool. Something I never thought I'd be able to do is play a 4-player free-for-all battle royale with like all my old school favorite Godzilla monsters. And then they came out with this game. It was actually pretty good. This was actually a really fun game, even for people that are not really into Godzilla. I highly recommend it. And I'm actually really excited for the new Godzilla movie that's coming out. The new Godzilla movie actually was pretty good. What I mean is the new Godzilla game that I think they're simply calling Godzilla. I was not expecting that to come out in the US, but they recently announced that it will be coming out in the US, so I'm pretty excited for that. And that's a really big throwback to the original style Godzilla films, even more so than Godzilla and Destroy All Monsters, so we'll see how that goes. Okay, next is Diddy Kong Racing for the Nintendo 3DS. Or the Nintendo DS, sorry. Now, the reason why this was such a big surprise is Diddy Kong Racing on the Nintendo 64 was always one of my favorite games on the system, one of my favorite racing games. I'd even go as far as to say it might even be my favorite racing game ever. Like, it's really good. And I'd always hoped that they would release a sequel, which they never have. This doesn't count as a sequel. But the fact that they actually acknowledged Diddy Kong Racing and re-released it on the DS. But the biggest thing for me was online play. Now, I know you can use emulators to play old games online, and there's a lot of hoops to jump through, so I know it's possible. But being able to do that, without having to go through all those loopholes, and be able to play Diddy Kong Racing on a handheld online against friends was such a big deal. Battle mode, racing, like it had everything, and I couldn't ask for more. I had always hoped that maybe one day we'd get an online version of Diddy Kong, and I got it, and I was really, really happy. I'm also going on the record and saying that I like Diddy Kong Racing more than Mario Kart 64. I think the only game, there's a lot of games, older games, that I want them to release with multiplayer online. A lot of N64 games, but I still want an online Power Stone 2. Please make it happen. Power Stone 2 online, that would be like a bigger deal to me than like a new Smash Brothers in terms of fighting games. I love the Power Stone games, or even Power Stone 3. Forget an HD collection with online. Just give me Power Stone 3. That's all I ask for. Okay, and the next one is Super Mario 64 for the DS. Now, the reason why this one was so significant when this came out for me, and I never thought it would happen, who could have ever imagined, when you played Super Mario 64 on the 64, you can always envision the future of gaming, but you can never truly envision it, right? I know that kind of doesn't make sense, but, when you're playing the N64, you could never dream what the future of gaming would truly be like. I'm sure everybody always thought of virtual reality, which is finally becoming reality with the Oculus Rift and many other devices that are in development. But who could have ever envisioned back when we were playing the Nintendo 64 that something like the Nintendo 3D or the Nintendo DS would come around and we'd be able to play games that we're playing on our TV on a handheld that looks better, if not just as good as it does on the Nintendo 64. So when they showed trailers for the DS at like E3 and they showed Super Mario 64 DS, it was mind-blowing because we had never really been able to play a console-style game like that on a handheld with that good of graphics. Like, it was a big deal. This was before the PSP. This was, this was coming out of Game Boy Advance. It was a huge graphical leap. And Super Mario 64 DS was a big deal. Is it a better game than Super Mario 64? No. It controls horribly on the DS. And the added characters didn't add anything. I think it actually made the game worse. One of the best additions, I think, were the mini games that they added, because some of them were actually really fun. But the way I actually played the game to make it control better was not with the D-pad, which a lot of people did, but in the old DSs, they actually used to come with this little thumb pad with a little piece of plastic on the end, and you can actually kind of finagle that to actually act as a joystick, an impromptu joystick, where you'd keep your thumb in place and you kind of hold it there and kind of move it around, and it would actually act as a joystick, and that's how I played through the game. Super Mario 64, I would still say, is one of the best games ever made. It'll always be in my top list. I don't know where it is number-wise, but I can tell you that it would definitely make my top 10 games of all time. And sort of shifting gears over to Sonic the Hedgehog, we have Sonic Adventure. Now, you guys know I'm a big Sonic fan. You guys know that. So, Sonic Adventure was not the first true outing if in a 3D world for Sonic. It was actually Sonic Jam on the Saturn, sort of like in the overworld game selection map, but I never played Sonic Jam before I played Sonic Adventure. So, when Sonic Adventure was announced, it sort of had the same impact on me as seeing Super Mario 64 for the first time. seeing Sonic in a 3D universe that looked freaking amazing. And I'm sure you guys all remember the first stage where they always show Sonic running down the boardwalk with the whale busting everything open behind. That's still one of like the most mind-blowing scenes in promotional videos for video games ever. Like, that moment will always stand out to me. It just looked amazing. And being able to get a Dreamcast, I remember getting the Dreamcast that Christmas. So a few months after it came out that year, and I got Sonic Adventure with it. And that was the only game I got with the console at first. And then, like, I think the next day, I went out and used some Christmas money and bought Power Stone. And that was a good time. But Sonic Adventure, being able to play a Sonic game in a 3D universe for the first time, and in my opinion, it was a really good game. I really enjoyed it. I even liked the stages with Big the Cat. I liked the Knuckles stages. I thought everything about the game was perfect. Well, back then. Looking back at it now, the game hasn't aged quite that well. The controls are very finicky. Level designs, some of them are not the greatest. Playing as Big now is not as exciting to me as it used to. I will admit Sonic Adventure has not aged incredibly well. But for the time, this was a game that was groundbreaking and definitely deserves to be on this list. Next is Dissidia Final Fantasy. This is, as a Final Fantasy fan, fans had always hoped and thought about like a crossover game, like for Smash Brothers. Like, give us a Final Fantasy. Sure, there was Urgies or Urgies or whatever on the PS1. I don't think I'll ever remember the actual pronunciation of that game, by the way. Anyway, but besides that game, people really always wanted a crossover fighting game for Final Fantasy, and Dissidia met that. I mean, this was an exciting moment when this was announced, because who would have ever thought that Square Enix would really go through the trouble of actually making a competent, actual good fighting game with every single, well, mostly all the major characters, arguably, from the Final Fantasy games, villains and heroes, and encompassing all games for the most part, almost all games. And pull it off in a very flashy fashion with amazing music, amazing graphics. This was one of the most visually stunning games for the PSP at the time. Controls and battle-wise, it wasn't the best. They did what they could with the limited controls of a PSP, the one joystick, and they had the combat was different. We'll just say that. If this game had released on, say, the Vita with two joysticks, I think it would have been a much, much better game. Who knows? Maybe they're not done with Dissidia. Maybe we'll see a return of a new Dissidia game now that there have been a multitude of new Final Fantasies since the release of the first Dissidia, or Duodecim as well. So, next is going to be Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon. And the reason why I'm putting this one on here is because Luigi's Mansion was, in my opinion, the best launch game for the GameCube. One of the best launch games of all time, period, for any launch of a console. I thought that game was just mind-blowing. You usually don't get that high of quality of a game for the launch of a system, unless you're including, like, maybe Twilight Princess was a huge surprise for a launch game, or Super Mario 64, obviously, but you get my point. Luigi's Mansion as a series seemed really dormant and just dead, and sort of like a one-off kind of thing. And then out of nowhere, they announced a sequel for the 3DS, and Luigi's Mansion, I thought, was always an amazing game because it was so atmospheric. The mansion itself just felt like a character in the game. I mean, there was so much personality. Every encounter with a ghost was just so memorable, and I really need to go back and play that game sometime, because in my opinion, the first is way better than the second. Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon actually lost a lot of what made the first one great, and that encounters with ghosts seemed not as unique. The ghosts lack that sort of personality, if you will. In the first game, every encounter was just so different, unique, whereas in Dark Moon, it just seemed sort of less thought out, the encounters. And the mansion itself was not as good, because in the first game, it was just like this one huge entire level, and then in the second one, it was sort of broken up into smaller sections with an overworld that I felt really destroyed the core and essence of what made the first Luigi's Mansion so great. But yeah, that was just something that I always wished would come out, is a new Luigi's Mansion game, and we actually got it. Okay, and next is Knight's Journey of Dreams. Knights had seemed to be a dead series. The last outing was on the Sega Dreamcast, the Sega Saturn. And Sega decided to bring out a sequel for the Wii. Unfortunately for the series, though, Journey of Dreams didn't really do it much justice. The actual flying sequences were actually quite good, where you're actually playing as knights and flying around. But that was littered with on-foot segments where you play as the kids, and those were quite terrible. Really bad controls. It was not fun. Maybe if it was a little bit scaled back and there wasn't quite as much of those levels, it would have been an amazing sequel and comeback for Knights. But unfortunately, it was just plagued with a lot of boring on-foot missions, and it's really a shame. I'm hoping this is not the last that we see of the Knights series, but I hate to say, Sega, I don't think, is willing to take a chance at reviving Knights. And not only that, but you guys know the whole thing with the breakup of basically the original team with Sega and Sonic and Yuji Naka and Probe, I think it was. Chances are we're probably never going to see another Knights game. It's unfortunate to say. So the Knights series kind of went out on a low note, I have to say. The original is still much better. The release of the HD version on 360 kind of gave me hope, but I think that's one that Sega's going to let kind of idle, if you will. Alright, the next is The Elder Scrolls for Oblivion. Now, not specifically this game, I'm using this as an example because when I played Oblivion, I had always thought to myself, oh my god, and I didn't think this during Morrowind because I wasn't really, I don't know, Oblivion really drew this out of me, but I was like, man, what if one day we get an online equivalent of an Elder Scrolls game? Imagine if you can play Oblivion online with friends in an MMORPG. And what do you know? Not that long ago, the Elder Scrolls Online was released, but unfortunately, it didn't live up to what I thought it would be. I would have been fine with where you can just play with a server of 20 people that populate a world where 20 people can play in a room at once, but I realized that an MMO version of an Elder Scrolls game was not what I thought it would be. It was just World of Warcraft had too much of an influence. I played it for 2 hours on a trial, and it was just so much quest grinding. The fact that you really didn't want to play the game in first person because it was so advantageous to play it in the third person made it not even feel like an Elder Scrolls game. But the fact that an online Elder Scrolls game did eventually finally come out, and I remember discussing this on my podcast with the AllGenGamers podcast with Johnny Millennium years ago, saying to him, man, wouldn't it be amazing if we could play an online Elder Scrolls game? Wouldn't it be? Well, for me, it just didn't catch on. Maybe it came out at the wrong moment, but because MMOs just don't really do it for me anymore. Ever since Final Fantasy XI, I just haven't been able to get back into it. And, I think for a future episode of Sleepin with Pete, if you guys enjoy these enough, I think I would love to spend one of these episodes serenading you to sleep. I can talk on and on about Final Fantasy XI and some of my memories and some of the crazy things that used to go on in that game. So, if you'd like to hear me talk like this about Final Fantasy XI for 20 or 30 minutes or so to put you to sleep, just let me know in the comments below. Alright, and second to last is Child of Eden. The reason why Child of Eden was something I never thought would come true is because Res HD was always one of my favorite games ever. And it was another game that I put on this list is when Res was remade in HD on 360. I mean, that was a big deal because, it came out on PS2 and Q Entertainment just seemed like they were never really going to do anything. Sorry for the edit here. It's just that, after half an hour, I guess this camera stops recording. But anyway, we're picking up where we left off. When Res HD came out, that was a huge deal because it was a PS2 game that just seemed like it was never going to receive a sequel. Like I said, Q Entertainment just like to move on to different projects and usually work on different games instead of creating sequels. And when Child of Eden was announced, actually, when they first started showing gameplay, I remember at the Ubisoft press conference, I don't even think they announced a name. They just started showing footage of Child of Eden, and I'm looking at it and I'm like, is that a sequel to Rez? And at the end, when they showed, I believe, Q Entertainment, and they were like, this is Child of Eden, and I'm like, oh my god, Rez 2, of course it's not called Rez 2, is coming out. It was probably one of the most memorable moments for me in terms of having a sequel announced to one of my favorite games ever that I never saw coming. Child of Eden lived up to the hype. It's not as good as Rez in my opinion, but it's an amazing rail shooter. I mean, I did a review of Child of Eden a long time ago, and unfortunately, stupid me, years ago, I took it down because the music in the game put a copyright claim on the video, and I'm like, oh no, I got scared and I took the review down. Kind of regret that because I really didn't have to. I know better now. But man, just it takes you on a journey, like it really does, through these few different levels with just an aesthetically beautiful landscape and amazing soundtrack. And the game actually turned me on to listening to the Genki Rockets, where Lumines on the PSP really introduced me to Genki Rockets, and Genki Rockets were sort of really put into the spotlight in Child of Eden, where in Lumines they only had one song, and it's a great band. It's a great band that you should give a listen to if you enjoy the soundtrack of Child of Eden. It's an actual band that does a lot of the music. But yeah, I mean, it works well as a Kinect game, but I like to play it now when I go back and replay it. I like to play it with either the controller. I tried playing it on the Move, but the calibration just wasn't quite right, so Child of Eden. And I lied, there's one more I want to talk about after this. It's a download game though. But Mirror's Edge, not specifically Mirror's Edge 1, but the announcement of Mirror's Edge 2 is very surprising because it seemed like Mirror's Edge was just, as a series, it seemed done. They announced a sequel a long time ago, and then we never heard anything. But it's actually coming true. Unlike Beyond Good and Evil 2, which still we have yet to see barely anything on, at least for Mirror's Edge, or the remake of Mirror's Edge, is actually coming to fruition, which is a good thing. After being put on hiatus and making us wonder for years and years, it's really coming true. Mirror's Edge has always been one of my favorite, probably one of the most, I think about Mirror's Edge all the time. I don't know what it is, I've played the game through once, I haven't touched it in years, but I always think about moments in this game, just memorable moments. Just the world design is so unique. It's just this empty utopia of a city that just is so futuristic, and just the color palette and how it plays with the white gray world. I mean, it's Mirror's Edge is so wonderful and so memorable. I can't wait for the sequel. And the last game that I just wanted to mention, there's probably a lot of online downloadable games that I could mention. The only one that immediately came to mind for me for this video was Sonic the Hedgehog 4. I mean, having a numbered sequel to Sonic was a big deal because obviously the last one was Sonic 3 on the Sega Genesis. So when they announced Sonic 4, I mean, the Sonic community just blew up. I mean, all these years later, we're finally going to see a numbered sequel to Sonic the Hedgehog. Did the game live up to the hype? No. Does it deserve the number? I guess you could say it does. I mean, at its essence, it really is a sequel. It's a side-scrolling Sonic game that, sure, there were side-scrolling Sonic games on the DS and other systems, Game Boy Advance, the Sonic Advance games, but the only one that really truly tried to capture the essence and the soul of what it felt like to play one of the original Genesis games was Sonic 4. They really tried to slow it down, and aside from a few additions like the homing attack and stuff like that, they really tried to make it like an original Sonic with the original badniks, the robots. Whereas the ones on the DS and the Game Boy Advance were more stylized. They were different. I don't think they would be deserving of a number. Some of them I think are actually better than Sonic 4 as a game, ironically enough. Sonic 4 just felt like it lacked a soul. It lacked a personality in the level designs. And Sonic 4 Episode 2, it was even worse, in my opinion. And weren't they supposed to, like, continue on the Sonic 4? Weren't they supposed to do, like, Episode 3 and 4? I guess that never came to fruition. Now the next Sonic game that I'm hoping comes true is Sonic Adventure 3. Who knows? Sega needs to get back on track with what they're doing with the Sonic series. That is for darn sure. Because I have not played Sonic Boom. I actually still have yet to play Sonic Lost World. That one seems very mixed in people's opinions. But Sega really needs to do something with Sonic. Maybe that's a discussion for another Sleeping with Pete episode. But I think Sonic, the way that they can bring people back in, Sonic Adventure 3, but actually make it a good game. Put some time, put some thought into it. Give it a 2-year development time. Don't rush it. Just make a Sega, please. Make a good Sonic Adventure 3. That's like your last shot if you haven't lost your fans already. I mean, I think some people have given up hope, but I think I'm rambling on too long. Maybe I'll save this discussion for another episode. So if you guys enjoyed this, and if you made it through to the end, let me know in the comments below. And if this video actually managed to put you to sleep, let me know as well, because that was my intention. So anyway, guys, have a nice sleep, or whatever you did during this video. I don't want to know. And I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.